Well, good morning. It's good to see you all, and good morning to everyone who's watching us online here this morning. So we started a new series last week, Sons and Daughters. And kind of the place that this whole series comes out of is this statement that is made by the Apostle John in this little bitty letter. It's 1 John. He's got 3 letters near the back of your Bible. And in chapter 3, he opens it up with this line. So let me read this line to you. This is out of John did I say John? I meant Galatians 3:1. Here's the verse, anyhow, okay? See what great love the Father, it is John, sorry. I've been a little challenged this morning. I got my pages mixed up in my notes in the last service, but it worked, so we'll see what happens. Okay, here's the verse, okay? Maybe I should look on the screen and read with you guys. See what great love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. And I love that line. That is what we are. It's kind of like, okay, if you're like, I'm not just saying this is what you really are. If you're a follower of Christ, you are a son or daughter of God. And so what does that mean? And that's what this whole series is about, is like, what does that mean? And last week, Ryan looked at this from this idea that as sons and daughters of God, we all have a role, but there's like this shared role, this thing that we have in common that is the same. And this week, I want to look at this kind of on the other side of it, again, with kind of the role that we have, but where Ryan looked at this shared role that we all have, I want to look at this and talk about the unique role that each of you have as an individual son or daughter of God who belongs to this family of God, because we all bring something important that makes an impact. But sometimes that can get missed. Sometimes we can struggle with that. We look around and we see other people and we're like, man, what they're doing, that seems important. That seems like that. They're changing the world. They're making an impact for God's kingdom and good things. In fact, who's someone that you would think of, maybe someone that you know well, and you think, man, they are a difference maker in this world, or they do something that's really, really important. Like, have someone in your life that you know and you think that about? We probably all do. Years ago, I had a neighbor. He has since passed away, but he was one of our neighbors in our little cul-de-sac, and his name was Hal. And he was an aerospace engineer. He was in his mid-90s when he was our neighbor. And so I don't know what it would have been called. He was a aero engineer. I don't know. Before it was aerospace engineer. Like, he was on the front end of this. In fact, he was like an aeronautical engineer that worked on planes that helped win World War II. And Hal was such a great guy, and he was so much fun to talk to. And he just kind of nonchalant talk about the projects he had worked on or whatever, like with NASA. And I just think, man, you've done some really important things. And here was the crazy thing, was in his mid-90s, he was still doing side projects for NASA and Boeing. And I remember just thinking, wow, you're like really important. And I would watch, he would bring his trash out. Like on the trash morning, I'd be working in my garage or something early in the morning, and he would bring his trash out. And Hal was slow at bringing his trash out because it's kind of a little bit of a slope. And in your mid-90s, he wasn't like real fast. And I remember that he'd be a little wobbly at times, and I'd get worried. And I'd sit there and I'm like, okay, I'm not going inside yet because I want to make sure Hal doesn't fall and I don't want him to get hurt. Finally, one day I watched him, struggling to get the trash can down there. And I went over there and I said, Hal, you need to let me do this. He goes, oh, no, you don't. And I said, okay, I've got a teenage son. My son was a teenager. I said, this would be a great project for him. Let him, because if you fall, you're going to break a leg or get hurt. And he laughed at me. He goes, oh, if I fall, young man, yeah. He goes, young man, it's over. That's what he told me. And I said, Hal, we need you. You're doing stuff. And he's like, no. And I'm thinking, and now I think about it, I'm like, astronauts could get stuck in space or something. And you're the guy they call, apparently, when they're trying to figure something out. And I always just think about, like, this is a guy, like what he does, his role is so important in this. And so when you think about this, like, who is it? And you think, man, they've got an important role in life, right? There's probably someone. Now, here's the thing, though. Sometimes as we begin to think about that and process that, there's a part of us that gets pulled into this thing at times where it's kind of a comparison thing. And we can begin to think, well, you know what? I see how important that role is. Maybe my role isn't all that important. Or maybe I don't really have a role in this. And this can happen especially in churches. Like, in churches or with spiritual things, so often we can look at something and say, man, I've got a leader of my small group or a teacher in my ABF or Bible study, like, man, they are organized, they're on top, what they're doing is really making an impact. And maybe you find yourself kind of shrinking back a little bit because you just feel like, I don't think of myself as really making a difference for the kingdom of God or for the church in some way. And we can get into this weird comparison thing that impacts our value as we see our role as sons or daughters of God. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, because I think this maybe happens to us more often than we realize. We start to evaluate things in a way that doesn't actually help us understand part of our role as sons and daughters of God. There was an exercise that they were, and I don't think they do this anymore, but I think I was in middle school when they did this, and it was called Lifeboat, the Lifeboat, like values clarification. Anyone ever do the Lifeboat exercise? Maybe it was just me in my middle school. But I know it was very controversial. So here's how the exercise worked. And maybe this will jog some of y'all's memories on this. And maybe I'm the only one, I don't know. We did an exercise, it's called Lifeboat something. And so the scenario was, right, for all the middle schoolers or, junior hires, it's like, okay, you're on a ship that is sinking, right? And most of the people have already gotten off on lifeboats, and the lifeboats have like pushed off and go into like a nearby desert island where you may have to survive or something like that. And there's only one lifeboat left. And in that lifeboat, there's only 3 seats left. The rest of it's full, 3 seats left. But there's 5 people still on the boat. See where this is going? Yeah. And so the values clarification was, right, we're going to describe these 5 people, and who do you think deserves to have one of the 3 seats left? Meaning, like, there's a couple of people that don't get a seat on the lifeboat, right? And they're having like middle schoolers go through this thing. And of course, they describe the 5 people, and like there's a woman and she's a surgeon, right? And she's like, she's done breakthrough surgeries, and, and they go through, and there's like Joe, the truck driver who still lives in his mom's basement. And then there's, and then the idea is like, we've got to evaluate these 5 people. Who's worthy? Who's the important people that are contributing, making a difference? And they, and I think it was the word deserve, one of those 3 seats on the lifeboat. Now, can you see why that'd be a little controversial? Yeah, it's not good for middle schoolers to go through this exercise, I don't think. But there's a part of us as human beings, right? We go, oh, well, I could kind of do a rank forcing of these 5 people and like who's the best one to get a seat on the lifeboat, if you got to go off over to the desert island and live for however long or whatever. And it creates this weird kind of comparison, right? And there's a part of that we get how our world works today, right? In so many ways, right? We see that the value that you bring to something or whatever it is. But here's the problem with that. For as much as there's something to that in how the world works in business or school or whatever it is, it's not how families work, right? This is not how families work on like a forced ranking of value of like all the members of your family. Parents don't introduce their, when they meet another family and neighbors like, oh, hi, here's my oldest child, and we're pretty proud of her, but then there's, my son here. He's the most important child we have. And then there's Billy down at the end. And well, it's Billy, right? Billy, you need to bring up those grades because we might go on a, Disney cruise next year for a family vacation. And if it sinks, hope, there's enough seats because, Billy, it's like, we don't think of that's not how, that wouldn't be healthy when you think about your family, because that's not how families work. And yet, in a weird way, we can get pulled into this kind of comparison thing. There's a part where we can begin to think about spiritual gifts or spiritual understanding or how we live our lives or what we do or what we bring, that in a way we start to see our value or our importance to the church in these weird ways that isn't how a family works. And here's the thing, friends. God's family isn't based on some sort of lifeboat principle thing here. That's not how God's family works. And that's part of the reason John uses this language to describe a different way to see ourselves in light of God, in light of the church. You are the sons and daughters of God. So here's what I want to do this morning. I want to walk out a different metaphor for what it means to think of yourself as a son or daughter of God. Because families, and here's the metaphor that I want to walk out this morning. Families are much more like a mosaic than they are a lifeboat that is like a few seats short of being enough, right? Families are like a mosaic. When you think about a mosaic is made up of all these tiny little tiles that are placed together and form the whole. In fact, I looked at a bunch of mosaics this week as I was kind of thinking through this. I want to show you an old, centuries and centuries old mosaic of Jesus. It's a Byzantine mosaic. And when you look at this mosaic, right, you see this picture of Jesus, but when you look real close, you can actually make out all of the little tiles, thousands and thousands of these little tiles. Every tile is important and is a part of that mosaic, but at the same time, it's all the tiles coming together that actually form the mosaic in it. And in many ways, that's how a family works. Every person in that family is a part of it, but it's all the people in the family together. That's what makes the family the family. And Paul, we're going to look at a different letter here in the New Testament that I actually want to walk through because he actually speaks directly to this. And Paul uses a metaphor of a human body in a very mosaic kind of way. And we're going to look at that. And it's actually found in 1 Corinthians. If you want to flip over to 1 Corinthians, we're going to look there in a moment. But Paul does this interesting thing where he uses the human body and describes it in a very mosaic way to help us understand our role and that there's a uniqueness to the role that we have. So here's what I want to do. I want to walk through this passage in 1 Corinthians, and I want to show you three things that this kind of comparison thing does, or this kind of lifeboat thinking does when we get into this comparison and how do I rank with others? Three things that it does, but three ways then how God wants us to see ourselves and others. And I want to pull us towards seeing ourselves and others in a different way. And again, kind of like a mosaic. So the first one. So turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And the first thing you're going to see is there's a kind of comparison that leaves people wondering if they belong. Do I really belong? And comparison does that. Because if you don't measure up, you're going to ask the question, do I belong? Do I have a place? And he writes this letter to Christians from a very varied background. There are a bunch of Gentiles and there are a bunch of Jews. The Gentiles are almost predominantly all from a Greek background in the city of Corinth. And like they would have felt like, man, we don't know the backstory to this. We never learned all of the Old Testament scriptures or the Torah or any of this stuff. We didn't practice religion in the same way. It feels like they're a leg up. Do we really belong to this thing? Do we have an important part? Are we just kind of tagging along behind the rest of them here? And here's what he says. Here's what he says. And again, he's using this illustration of the body as a metaphor, very similar to how we think of a mosaic. He says this, verse 12. Just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. So this is that picture of like a mosaic. Verse 13, for we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of the one part, but of many. This is the picture of a mosaic. It's many parts, but it's one body. We're a part of one family in this. And so here's how God wants us to see ourselves in this. And this is the first point of application here. See yourself as belonging to the mosaic that is God's family. He wants you to see that you belong. But what you belong to is this kind of beautiful mosaic that is the church, made up of everyone here. The church is not this building. The church is not a piece of property. The church, right, the body of Christ, is the people that are his followers. That's the church. Now, this is a little thing, but it matters. And I want you to think about this. You know, oftentimes when we talk about church or how we're connected, have you ever noticed this? How often we say, I'm gonna go to church? We talk about it like it's just a place. I'm gonna go to church. And the reality is, right, when families talk about their family, that's not how they talk about families, right? My kids don't go, well, I'm gonna go to the Barteau family. It's like, no, that like you are a Barteau. You belong. It's what you are, not the thing that you go to. And so in a little way, I would just like lean into that. Like when you think about going to church, do you think about just that's someplace I just attend? Or no, that's where I belong. That this is a place I'm going in there. And whether you're new or whether you've been a part of the church for a long time, maybe you're here and you're visiting and just checking things out, which, by the way, welcome. It is absolutely great to have you here. Maybe you're kind of checking out God for the very first time. You say, I don't know if I wouldn't call myself a follower of Jesus yet. You know what? We're so glad you're here. But to take that next step at some point isn't just, okay, I'm gonna become an attender here. It's that I'm gonna actually become a part of that mosaic. Who I am as that little tile matters, and my tile, like it fits in with everyone else's. I belong to the church. And so my encouragement to all of us is when you think about belonging, think about that next step. What is that next step? Maybe it's a step of vulnerability with someone around you. Maybe it's belonging to a small group. Maybe it's participating in a new way. But it is about seeing yourself as actually belonging to God's family. Now, second thing that comparison does that we see out of this passage, and that is when we get into this comparison thing, and you start looking at like the roles, you think, okay, those are the really important roles. That role makes a difference. We start narrowing our idea of what a good Christian needs to be. We start narrowing our idea of like all Christians need to head towards this one thing and look exactly like this. Like all the little pieces of the mosaic need to look exactly the same. Like that's the goal. But think about this for a moment. What would a mosaic be like if all the pieces in the mosaic were the exact same color and the exact same shape? It wouldn't be a mosaic. It would just be like a blank piece of mosaic paper or something. I don't know. It's not how mosaics work, are they? It's the uniquenesses that become important. But there's this thing that we get pulled into where we lose that. So here's the point that I want you to think about in all of this is, as I am that little piece, like, what does that mean? And so here's what Paul says. Look back at the passage. He gets at this. Look at verse 15. He says this. He says, now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not be for that reason to stop being a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being a part of the body. In other words, what it's saying is like it'd be really easy for the foot to say, oh man, a hand seems so much better, right? Hand gets to do way more fun things, right? It's not stuck in a shoe all day or something like that. If only I could be a hand, and you're only important if you're a hand or if you're an eye. And what he's saying is like, no, like if the entire body was just a hand and eye, other than that being a really weird looking individual, right? There'd be this kind of loss to it. And you can't just start ranking things and saying this is better and we all need to be hands or eyes in this thing. He goes on with it. And he says this, look at verse 17. He says, if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. So like his point is, there is something unique about how God has wired you that becomes important. And even though at first glance, we might want to do a comparison thing that would elevate one over the other, he says like you're missing the point, because then you're no longer functioning as the body, and we need all of those parts. I was thinking about this, from a church perspective, there are so many things that go on within our church that we rarely ever see, and yet they're important. Like many of you may not know this, but we have a number of volunteers that come in during the week and volunteer their time and do all of these administrative things that just, if those weren't going on, it wouldn't advance all of these beautiful things that we get to experience every single week around here. Earlier this week, I was walking across the campus and a door was open in one of the buildings, and I could like hear people in there. And me just being me, I was just like, wow, it sounds like there's people in there, and I'm all by myself out here, and I'm kind of a people person. I'm gonna go check out who those people are, because it just sounds like they're having fun in there. So I walked through the door, and it was our Jubilee choir, and I had no idea that they were meeting on Thursdays in that room. They were getting ready to have their practice, and so I walked in on our Jubilee choir, and just got to enjoy who they were. But many of you may not know this, but we have a Jubilee choir that was started some 40 years ago and has been continuously going. They have this beautiful value of like, everyone can be a part of that, right? I don't know, well, they do have one caveat. You have to have at least one gray hair. But I think they're willing to waive that as well if you really want to be in the Jubilee choir. But here's the beautiful thing about the Jubilee choir, is it for us as a church becomes this connection to other churches. It becomes a ministry that goes and serves places like veterans centers and just brings this message of Christ's love and just goes and just ministers to people, goes to different places throughout our city. And they've been doing this for 40 some years. And it's just this spirit to serve and bring music and bring something good and beautiful. And we, right, that is part of the mosaic of who we are. And it brings this beautiful, beautiful thing in this. And there is a uniqueness that all of you have. You all have a unique role that is important, right? And so here's the point of application on like what we need to see that Paul is getting at. And it's this: see your uniqueness as a piece of God's mosaic of his family. You've got to see your uniqueness as a part of this, okay? Now, Some of you, as I'm like encouraging you to lean into your uniqueness, you may be going, well, that's great, but like, what do you mean by my uniqueness? What would that uniqueness be? So let me just take a moment and give you a few things that would help any of us identify part of our uniqueness that we get to apply to our role as being a part of God's family. And there's three basic areas. First area is this: skills, abilities, and resources. You all have skills, abilities, and resources that are a part of what make you uniquely you. And what I mean by skills are skills that you have learned. There's something that you have learned how to do. Some of you are great at administrative tasks and leadership tasks, organizing something. I think about when we did the Love Our City event, right? There were some of you that have skills that you have learned and cultivated and worked on. And without those skills, no matter how wonderful our intentions were, we could not have executed a day like something as big as Love Our City and had it go as smoothly as it did in there. Some of you have like what I might call maximizing skills. Like you know how to delegate, you know how to inspire someone else to use their skills in even greater ways. And this is something that you have learned how to do. Think of abilities maybe as things that you do naturally. It's kind of, there's something about how God wired you in a very natural way. Some of you are very people, right? You're like, it's just, you are connectors. And there's this thing that you do and you just help people connect to other people and connect to this place. I think about all the people that serve in our guest services ministry here. And so many of them have these like natural abilities that just help people have a warm experience and connect into this place. It is a beautiful thing. Some of you have natural creative skills that get to applied to all these different areas within our church. We all have resources, time, finances, things that we invest back into our family. And it's a part of our role. So when you think about your role, like there are skills, abilities, and resources that you have that's unique to you. But there's a couple of other things. Another one is there is a perspective that you bring, right? If you think about that big mosaic and we're all individual tiles, you have an individual perspective. God has walked you through a spiritual journey throughout your life. And I want you to think about this for a second. What's one of the biggest struggles you ever went through in your life? I bet that you came out on the other end of that and there were things that God taught you, lessons about life that you learned. There is a perspective that you have that is so valuable. Things that you have celebrated, maybe beautiful things, but you've learned from that. God has walked you through a journey, and there is a perspective, an insight that you have that is valuable. Now, what happens when that insight gets planted inside the church because you are a part of God's family? It's like there's something, we all get to benefit from kind of the role that you have, even if it's just, in my what I've learned from God, I get to share with my brothers and sisters, other sons and daughters of God within the church. Third thing is your personality, your personhood. There is a way that God has wired each and every one of you that is wildly unique and very important. Right? And this is important in every family. Think about your family, right? There are things about the people within your family that maybe in your family you go, well, we kind of call it a quirk, but it makes us unique, so-and-so in the family is like this. And you think about the personalities of all the different people in your family and how that all comes together, and it gives your family a unique kind of personality. If you're not engaged in your church, like we don't get to benefit from the flavor of who you are being a part of the church, just like this is with every family. I think about my own family. My mom captured this really, really well. So I won't mention which of my two children this is, but when she was young, she was a little strong-willed, okay? And that is an understatement. And my mom, as only a grandmother could, captured it so well. She'd say of Coley, oh yes, She is sugar and spice and fire and spit. And I was like, yeah, yes. But I look back on that and who my daughter is as, sugar and spice and fire and spit, she brought that uniqueness into our family and it kind of shaped who we are. And in a way that I would never want to lose that. There was a strength to that was good. There was a strength to that was kind of a pain in the neck sometimes, but there was a strength to it that we also liked. In fact, there was one summer, a long time ago when my kids were really young, Coley had just learned how to walk. So she was in that toddler phase where she was walking and we were taking a family vacation to Disney and my parents were coming with us. And we were just like, oh man, this is gonna be a job because Colette, sugar and spice and fire and spit can now walk around on her own. This is gonna be all game changer for what it means to go to someplace like Disneyland. And my mom, right, being her own little unique tile within our family is just like, I got this covered. I know what to do. And so she went and my mom got a harness with a leash on the end of it. Yeah, and I'm thinking, we're gonna be that family? Kids on a leash. And I'm like, and then I'm thinking, Mom, put a leash on Coley? Fire, you're gonna experience the fire and spit, all right? This is coming. My mom's like, no, I got this, right? And then my mom, contributes, and this is just who my mom was. She knew her grandchildren so well. She got Coley and she goes, Coley, we're going to Disneyland and we want to go on all the rides we can. And I'm going to need your help, right? She goes, so I'm going to get you a puller and you can help pull your family around. Isn't that brilliant? She wasn't on a leash and we're, holding her back. She was the one hook me up, here we go, right? And I'll be darned if we didn't get more rides that time than we've ever done on a trip to Disneyland because, my little girl was pulling us around on that thing, right? And and I think about those stories and it's the uniquenesses of my, just how God wired my daughter, how God wired my mom, me, and this is how a family works, right? There are those things, think about your own family. There are the things that drive you crazy, but that you're also a little proud of, right? That distinguish your family in a beautiful way. And what Paul is getting at here is he's saying, and that's God's family. He didn't make you all to be the same shape, the same color, with the same gifts in the same way. God's family is like a mosaic. And when we bring our uniquenesses, you have a role. Because there's no one else exactly like you. And you bring something beautiful when you bring that role to the church in all of this. So lean into the uniqueness of who God made you to be in this. Now, one more thing in this. When we get caught in this kind of comparison thing, sometimes we can lean into our individuality, our uniqueness in this. But that comparison way, especially when we lean into that, can have a way of pushing us apart as a family. And that was going on in Corinth, right? The comparison thing was creating rifts and pushing people apart in all of this. You weren't valuing the other person in who they were in their uniquenesses. And so here's what he says. Look back at verse 21. He says this, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. Why? Because we need each other in this. And he goes on, verse 22. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And this is important for us because if we get into the comparison thing, right, the other direction we can go, we can devalue ourselves, but the other direction we can go is we can just think, well, they're not that important. Their role doesn't matter as much, right? And what he's saying is, no. In a family, everyone matters. Everyone needs to bring their little tile to this. We need their tile in this because that makes a difference. Here's the problem though, right? Here's our struggle. Those tiles don't always want to go together real easily because we're all different. We're all unique. But you realize this is one of the things that makes a mosaic a mosaic. Looking at all these mosaics this week, I noticed something that I saw in virtually every mosaic I looked. And that is when you look at a mosaic, and go ahead and bring up that mosaic of Jesus again. When you look at it in the broader picture, right, you see the picture really, really clearly. But there's an interesting thing that happens when you zoom in. So go ahead and zoom in on this. There's Jesus's eye, right? But look at the space around each of the mosaics, right? Those pieces don't just fit perfectly like pieces of a puzzle. The gaps between the different pieces varies in great degrees. You can see spots where the person who made the mosaic maybe chipped off a little piece or rubbed a piece to get it to fit in. There's places where they're touching. There's places where the gaps are wide. There's they don't fit in perfectly, but what's beautiful about that is even in them not all fitting together perfectly, when you zoom back out, the consistency of how all those pieces have to make space for the other pieces, it makes mosaics a very unique form of artwork from any other kind of artwork, because you have to make space for those other pieces. And so here's the point of application is, we have to see others as a unique piece within God's mosaic as well. So while I want you to lean into who you are uniquely and who God made you to be, at the same time, it means creating space for others to be uniquely who God made them to be. And that doesn't always fit together real easily. But we're all in Christ. And so we work on making that space with trying to still be who we are. And what you find in that is everyone has a role, and it's important. Even if we don't see it, God in his own way brings that out. Let me close with this story that illustrates all of this. So there was this guy who had recently become a follower of Christ. And he became a Christian through this little bitty church that really was so different than him in so many different ways. But he got invited there. He learned about Christ there. And it did all of these wonderful things that helped him move toward starting this relationship with Christ. And so he's like, that's kind of my church, even though he goes, I don't fit in, because he showed up to church wearing like leather biker boots, and his he had a great big wallet hooked to a chain, hooked to his belt, and he wore a biker jacket. And he walked into church, a little bitty church, and everyone was wearing a suit and tie or a dress, right? And here's biker dude walking in, every single Sunday. It's just like, I just kind of stand out, but I don't even own a suit. I don't even know how to tie a tie, right? And, he had tattoos. In fact, he had more tattoos than the rest of the church combined, right? He kind of stood out a little bit, but he's like, this is my church. And I don't know if I fit in or if I have a role, but I'm going to try. So then the pastor started this new series on using your spiritual gifts, on volunteering in the church. So he is really smart. Maybe we'll try a series like this sometime. Okay? So what he'd do is he'd preach on every area of the church. So one Sunday he preached on the student ministry of the church, right? How important high school and middle school is. And then he would get to the end of his message and he would actually recruit people in the moment. Like, there's a deep need in here, and if this lines up with your gifts or whatever, who's going to volunteer, right? We've got 5 slots in the student area. And then he'd get 5 people to volunteer for that area. And then the next Sunday he went to like the worship area, and he did kind of the same thing. He'd get to the end of the sermon, and he's like, we've got 6 places and we need, and he gets 4 of them. And he's like, okay, but I want the rest of you thinking about it. And he goes through this again and again and again. And then he gets to the children's area, like 4 or 5 Sundays into it. And he preaches through the whole thing about the value of children's ministry and how we have to have people doing this, and we need this for our children's ministry. And then he's like, okay, who's going to sign up? And no one signs up. It's just nothing. And this biker guy's been like, man, I didn't fit the worship area. I sure didn't fit the student area. Like I didn't, I haven't fit any of these areas, right, at all. And I sure don't fit the children's area. Like I don't have any kids, and and I just, who am I? I don't fit this. And this preacher, he's like, man, no one volunteered. So he starts preaching again, and he just keeps on going, right? The clock's running. He's just like, I got to get some volunteers. Nobody's going to volunteer, right? No one wants to change diapers. No one's just like, I don't want to serve in that area, right? So finally, this biker dude's like, somebody needs to volunteer. And I mean, listen to the guy. They're desperate, and this is so important. He's just like this. And finally, the preacher goes on, and he's asked for more volunteers. And finally, the biker goes, okay, if no one else will do this. So he stands up and raises his hand. I'll volunteer. The whole church looks at this guy, and then 20 hands go up. Yeah. And then this little old lady sitting next to the biker dude leans over and she goes, I know what your role in the church is. You're the best recruiter we've ever had. Yeah. See? You never know. God uses everyone. He's going to use you, and he's going to use the person next to you. So lean in and be a part of the mosaic that is God's family. Okay, I'm gonna close this out here. And as I say that, if you're visiting here, it is so good to have you here. And I'm gonna be standing over by these high top tables. Would love to just shake your hand, personally welcome you here this morning. If you want someone to pray for you, maybe you're something going on in your life and you're just like, I want someone to pray with me or for me, I invite you in our prayer place. We've got some wonderful people that would love to help you out. Why don't you stand? And let me just close this out this morning with a blessing. May God just shine his face upon you. May he fill you with a vision for your place and your role in the family of God. Amen. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you next week.